Welcome to the Mycitizenagency channel. Imagine you're choosing an EU country to move to. At first glance, it might seem that the main question is where it's easiest to obtain initial residency and move there quickly. But if your goal isn't just to live in Europe temporarily, but to eventually obtain citizenship, your approach needs to be entirely different. It's important to look not only at how to enter and legalize your status at the start, but at the entire process. How many years you need to live there, what the requirements are for language, income, integration, avoiding long-term absences, tax residency, and status renewal. Because a country that seems convenient at the first stage isn't always suitable for obtaining citizenship in the future. The first question is, why do you specifically want EU citizenship? For some, it's the freedom to move and live in European Union countries. For others, it's family security, access to European education, the opportunity to build a career or business in Europe, a more powerful passport, long-term stability, and asset protection. It's important to honestly define your goal. Do you want to live specifically in the country you've chosen, or do you see it as a path to European citizenship? Do you plan to move with your entire family? Is it important to you that your children receive a European education in the future? Are you actually prepared to live in the country for several years in a row? Are you ready to learn the language and integrate? The answers to these questions immediately influence your choice of country. Because citizenship is not just a final document. It is a process that requires time, consistency, and compliance with conditions. One of the main mistakes is choosing a country solely based on where the path to citizenship seems shortest or simplest at first glance. But for citizenship, it's not just the formal requirement in the law that matters, but the entire practical path to obtaining a passport. It's important to determine the method of obtaining citizenship right away. This could be naturalization after long-term residence, repatriation with valid grounds, citizenship through marriage, the investment route, or other legal grounds provided by a specific country. Each option has its own conditions, timeframes, document requirements, and risks. What works for one person may be completely ineffective or impossible for another. Sometimes a country seems attractive in terms of timeframes, but in practice, the path to citizenship turns out to be more complicated. For example, there may be strict monitoring of actual residence, restrictions on long-term absences, a mandatory language exam, requirements for tax residency, proof of income, or integration into society. And if you don't take these conditions into account in advance, you may find yourself in a situation a few years later where the formal deadline has passed, but applying for citizenship is still not possible. Therefore, you should evaluate a country not based on the principle of where is it faster, but on which method of obtaining citizenship suits you specifically and where you can realistically meet all the requirements. The right question is not where is citizenship easier, but which path to citizenship suits my situation, and can I actually see it through to the end? The next criterion is timeframes. The timeframes for obtaining citizenship vary across different EU countries. In some places, the process may take about a year. In others, 7, 8, 10 years or more. But it's important to understand, the nominal time frame in the law isn't the whole picture. It provides only a general guideline but doesn't always reflect the actual journey of a specific individual. You need to consider when the countdown begins. Is the entire period of residence counted? Is it necessary to first obtain permanent resident status? Can you apply immediately after the waiting period ends, or are there additional conditions? How long does it take to process the application? How consistent is the practice, and how predictably does the country handle such applications? It is also important to consider the chosen method of obtaining citizenship. For example, in naturalization, the timeframes usually depend on the length of residence and fulfillment of integration requirements. In repatriation, documents confirming origin may play a key role. In the case of marriage, the timeframes may be shortened, but specific requirements regarding the relationship, cohabitation, and verification of circumstances come into play. Therefore, the same time frame can work differently in different situations. For example, two countries may formally have similar time frames, but in one, the process will be more straightforward, while in the other, it will be more complex due to requirements regarding residence, language, documents, or the length of the review process. Therefore, the time frame for citizenship should be assessed not by a nice-sounding number, but by the actual path from the first step to the passport. If your goal is citizenship, it is important to understand in advance how much time you must actually spend in the country. Some applicants want to obtain EU citizenship but are not prepared to live permanently in the chosen country. Here, you must immediately assess the feasibility of such a request, because in many cases, citizenship requires not just a formal connection to the country, but actual presence and integration. In many countries, simply having a status or being formally registered as a resident is not sufficient for naturalization. You typically need to prove actual residence, a connection to the country, the center of your life's interests, and tax and social integration. There may also be restrictions on travel. For example, a prolonged absence from the country can interrupt the residency period, reset part of the progress, or negatively impact your application. It is important to understand that the government evaluates not only the number of years, but also how closely your life is actually connected to that country, where you live, work, and pay taxes, where your children attend school, and where your family and primary interests are located. Therefore, before choosing a country, you need to honestly ask yourself, are you prepared to live there most of the time? Is your family ready for this? Can you balance this with work, business, your children's education, and personal circumstances? Another important criterion is language. When it comes to citizenship, language proficiency is almost always a major factor. In some countries, the requirements are more lenient. In others, they are stricter. In some places, you must pass a language exam. In others, your knowledge of history, culture, legislation, and the basics of public life is also tested. Therefore, when choosing a country, it is important to assess not only whether you like the country, but also whether you are willing to learn its language. And this is not just about a formal exam, but about the actual ability to live, communicate, handle everyday matters, and interact with government agencies, schools, banks, doctors, and the local community. Integration is not a mere formality. For the state, it is an indicator that a person truly sees their future in the country, understands its rules, and is ready to be part of society. Therefore, in a few years, it is precisely the language exam or integration assessment that may become a key step on the path to citizenship. If you are moving with your family, you should not choose a country based solely on the main applicant's situation. It is important to understand how the chosen path works for your spouse and children. Can family members live with you? Does their period of residence count toward eligibility? Will they be eligible for education, employment, and healthcare? Will the children be able to adapt to school? What is the language of instruction? What documents will be required for the entire family? Can the family apply for citizenship together, or will each member have a separate path? For many immigrants, children are the main reason for choosing EU citizenship. In this case, it's important to evaluate the country in terms of education, safety, the social environment, and future opportunities. You need to understand in advance how easily your child will adapt, what schools are available, what language is used for instruction, and what prospects open up after obtaining citizenship. It is also important to consider that the paths of family members may differ. A spouse may have separate requirements regarding residency, language, income, or integration. Children have their own rules, which depend on their age, their parents' status, and the laws of the specific country. Therefore, the path to citizenship must be realistic not only for you, but for the entire family. For citizenship, it's not enough to simply live in the country for the required number of years. You usually need to demonstrate that you are living in the country legally and stably. You have an income, housing, fulfill your tax obligations, and do not violate residency rules. Therefore, when choosing a country, you need to assess in advance how you will live during all these years and what source of income you will use to confirm your financial stability. Do you plan to work as an employee, run a business, be a self-employed professional, receive income from abroad, invest, develop a company in Europe? This determines which country will be the most practical for you. For example, a professional should consider the job market, recognition of their degree, demand for their profession, and salary levels. An entrepreneur should look at taxes, accounting, banking, the business environment, and requirements for the company. A financially independent individual should focus on proof of income, tax implications, and transparency regarding the source of funds. It is also important to understand that your source of income must not only be sufficient but also transparent to the state. If a person has lived in a country for several years but cannot explain how they support themselves, where they pay taxes, and how they fulfill their financial obligations, this can create complications when applying for citizenship. If you plan to live in the country for several years and apply for citizenship in the future, you cannot put off tax matters until later. It is important to understand where you will become a tax resident, what income will be subject to taxation, how to verify the source of funds, what reports need to be filed, how to manage bank accounts, and how to properly structure your business or personal assets. This is particularly important for entrepreneurs and investors with international income. Sometimes a country may seem like a good choice for citizenship, but the tax burden or reporting requirements might turn out to be unsuitable. And sometimes the opposite is true. A country may require more preparation at the outset, but offers a clear system for long-term residency and integration. Another important question is whether the country allows dual citizenship. For some, this is a matter of principle. Some are willing to renounce their previous citizenship for an EU passport. Others want to retain their current passport for family, business, property, or personal reasons. Rules vary from country to country. In some places, dual citizenship is permitted, in others, it is restricted, and in still others, exceptions may apply. Furthermore, it is important to consider not only the rules of your chosen EU country, but also the laws of your current country of citizenship. Sometimes the issue comes down not only to whether the new country will allow you to keep your passport, but also to whether your country of origin permits it. Therefore, before choosing a country, you need to understand in advance whether its laws align with your personal strategy. Because it may turn out that a country is suitable in terms of processing time, language, and quality of life, but is unsuitable precisely because of the issue of dual citizenship. And if retaining your current passport is important to you, this criterion must be considered from the very beginning, not at the final stage before applying for citizenship. When it comes to citizenship, speed is an important criterion, but not the only one. Faster doesn't always mean more reliable. The shortest time frame on paper doesn't always mean the easiest and safest path in practice. It's much more important that the chosen route is legal, clear, fits your profile, and is realistic to follow. If a country requires actual residence and you are not prepared to live there, that option is not suitable. If you need to learn a language that you are not prepared to learn, that is also a risk. If the tax system does not align with your income and business model, this could create complications in the future. The same applies to family, work, documents, integration, and dual citizenship rules. It is important to choose not just the fastest country, but the country where your actual circumstances align with the legal requirements. Because citizenship is not a one-time document processing, but a path that must be followed consistently and without violations. Therefore, the right strategy is to choose not the fastest path, but the one you can actually see through to the end. It is better to spend more time preparing and choose a sustainable path than to realize a few years later that the formerly quick option turned out to be unsuitable for your specific situation. Let's summarize everything into a simple algorithm. First, determine why you want EU citizenship: for living, family, business, your children's education, freedom of movement, or long-term security. Second, choose a possible method of obtaining citizenship: naturalization, repatriation, marriage, the investment route, or another legal basis. The method will determine the timeline, documents, requirements, and your entire strategy moving forward. Third, assess whether you are actually prepared to reside in the chosen country for the required number of years if the chosen path requires actual residence. Fourth, check the timeline for obtaining citizenship and which periods count toward that timeline. Fifth, review the requirements regarding language, integration, income, housing, absence of extended absences, and compliance with the country's laws. Sixth, verify whether the country is suitable for your family, your spouse, children, their education, adaptation, and future plans. Seventh, assess the tax implications and the financial model of living there. Eighth, check the rules on dual citizenship and determine in advance whether you can retain your current passport if that is important to you. And ninth, compare not only the countries but the entire process, from choosing the basis for citizenship to applying and receiving your passport. This approach helps you choose not just a popular destination, but a realistic path that fits your specific situation. If you are considering moving to the EU to obtain citizenship, do not choose a country based solely on reviews, rankings, or the destination's popularity. Citizenship is not a random outcome of moving. It is a goal that requires a clear plan, the right documents, and a strategy designed for several years ahead. Submit a request for a free consultation via the link in the description. We will analyze your situation, create your personalized immigration plan, and prepare a complete set of documents for successfully obtaining citizenship in one of the EU countries. We work on a one-on-one basis, taking into account your goals, your lifestyle, and your specific situation. Thank you for watching this video. If you're interested in this topic, subscribe to the channel and feel free to ask questions in the comments. We regularly publish program reviews, answer frequently asked questions, and share important news about immigration law and life in the EU. Your journey to Europe begins with the first step. Mycitizenagency is here for you every step of the way.